Across the Fence, we're all about goats. We'll learn about what it takes to keep goats and check in with two herds in Vermont that, yes, will certainly get your goat. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. Goats are having a moment. For a few years now, yoga with goats has become popular across the country, including in Vermont and New Hampshire. The internet is flooded with pictures and videos of baby goats wearing pajamas to screaming goats. One video a lot of people fall for is of a rare breed native to North America. Across the Fence's Keith Silva found a herd of these unusual goats in Vermont and filed this report.
Pay attention to this goat. Let's watch that again. This time in slow motion.
When you mention myotonic goat, people look at you funny, but if you say fainting goat, everybody knows who they are.
Myotonic goats go by many names. Stiff goats, nervous goats, Tennessee fainting goats, and best of all, the Texas wooden leg. Whatever you call them, they were made this way.
It's a genetic fault. Both parents have to carry a copy of that genetic fault in order for their kids to faint. If you carry one copy, they will not do it.
Fainting goats don't faint so much as fall over. And for the record, no goats were harmed in the making of this story.
They don't literally faint like you or I and go out. They get an oversized body cramp, and if they're moving forward, they will fall and freeze. It doesn't hurt them. It goes 5 to 20 seconds. They get up, walk stiff-legged, and off they go and continue their day as normal. The older goats, they feel it coming on and they will brace themselves. They actually get into a stance where the legs all sprawled out, and rarely do they go over. The babies, it's game on. I mean, they'll be playing in midair and down they go and scream and flop like fish. They get used to it. They learn to feel that mechanism coming on, and they will start to brace themselves.
Sherry Siebenaler has been raising fainting goats at Morgan Hill Farm in North Hero since 2008. She first learned about this rare goat breed as a child.
I grew up on a dairy farm, so animals were always in my background. And as a kid, every kid that deals with animals usually wants a goat. I had a book and I opened it and there was this Tennessee fainting goat, and I was like, what on earth? And from that moment on, I was intrigued. I mean, that was many, many, many years ago. And I could not find any of them. There was absolutely nothing up in this northern hemisphere of the United States. They were all down south, and I couldn't afford to buy one and bring it up. I found some by accident in New York State. The doe had just had kids, and I looked at the lady and I said, oh my goodness, what are you doing with those? She said, I think I'm going to sell them. I said, sold. And we bought the 2 doelings, and that was the start of this 60-some-odd goat herd.
Fainting goats don't do so well in the wild for obvious reasons, which makes them the perfect breed for anyone gung-ho to get into the goat game.
They are the quietest, easiest to handle goats in the world because goats are notorious for getting out of fencing. These goats literally cannot climb because they'll faint. They fall over, so they can't go leaping over fences and crashing through things. It's just not in their DNA.
Laughs aside, these goats have a purpose: meat. It's another added benefit thanks to their DNA.
When they faint, it acts kind of like a steroid. So they tense up, and what that does is when that happens, it builds muscle. Muscle is meat, and at the same time, it tenderizes it. I mean, that doesn't mean you're going to go out and scare your goat every day. Our goal was to try and get a genetic pool that produced a very meaty goat, meaning a nice shoulder, front end, and a rear end. And we're getting there.
Siebenaler is currently enrolled in a USDA program she hopes will eventually allow her to sell her goats overseas. For now, she markets the meat, along with goat's milk soap that she makes, at local craft shows and through word of mouth. The goats are only one of the animals Siebenaler cares for. She also raises purebred Labrador retrievers and colored Morgan horses, for whom Morgan Hill Farm gets its name. For Siebenaler, raising animals is a way to manage stress and keep a connection to the land.
I wake up in the morning and think I'm crazy. I'll admit it. But I walk out here in the morning, and when the goats see me, it's like your kids. They all talk to me. They all want to come up to the fence. They all want to say hello. And in this crazy world that we live in, it's so much nicer to just walk out here and know I'm appreciated.
We could all use more stress relief and comic relief in our lives. And that's nothing to kid about.
Come on, go to goat!
In North Hero, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
Go goats!
Thanks, Keith. Joining me now is Kimberly Hagan. She's a grazing outreach specialist with UVM Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Welcome to you.
Hi, Judy.
In full disclosure, I have to say, I have had goats in the past, and I love them. Do we know how many goats there are in Vermont and the number of goat-based businesses?
You know, I was looking at the 2012 census, and it looks like there's a little over 400, somewhere between 450 and 480 goat farms that answered the census. So it's someplace around there.
And so about how many goats do you think that represents?
It's several thousand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how often do you get calls from someone looking for information about goats?
I would say, I mean, it goes up and down, but at least once a week. It probably
Really?
averages out, yeah.
And so what are some of the questions you get?
Well, these days it's mostly, excuse me, people trying to find ways to deal with invasive plants or overgrown areas,
Yeah.
a lot of bramble and brush. And they would like to find a way to do it without having to use hand labor.
And so how much does it cost for a goat, and what kinds of things do you have to know about them before you leap into that business?
Yeah, I wish more people would think about it. The thing about goats is they do need structure. They do need to have protection at certain times. They have an exposed backbone. Their backbone is, their spine is high.
Yes.
So they can get a chill if they get cold and wet, for instance. So they do need to have cover. And the cost of a goat really varies. It really depends on the type and what you're planning to do with it. So a prized dairy goat that, you know, with genetics for giving a lot of milk, you're going to pay several $100s for. And then others, it might be, you know, just your backyard goat. It could be $60 to $200.
And so what are some of the things that you need for a goat? Obviously good fencing. As we heard,
Yes.
goats can get out of almost anything.
Yes, they do need good fencing, and I can't stress that enough. And also training them to understand about the fence before you turn them loose into a pasture.
And it usually, electric fencing is
Yes.
most effective, which means they have to know that it is electric.
Yes.
So their nose at some point has to touch it.
Does.
So that they are like, okay, that's a fence I'm not going anywhere near.
Right.
So what about vet care?
Vet care, well, again, it's like with sheep as well. There weren't as many vets, you know, before that really had a lot of experience with them. And a lot of the sheep and goat people would depend on each other for, you know, helping out and using books and consulting with places, you know, that are outside the state. But I would say a lot more of the vets now in state are more familiar. They've had enough people calling them, so they can depend on. There's some that are more specialized than others.
Do they need regular vaccinations or?
They do, yes, especially if you're going to be doing meat or milk and selling either of those products. You definitely need to be thinking about vaccinations and keeping up with that.
And then there are also regular care issues like trimming the feet.
Trimming feet and then shearing some, like the fiber goats, the Angoras, they need to be shorn as do sheep. But yes, you do need to keep up with annual maintenance.
Exactly. Now you specialize in working with grass-based farmers. How much room do goats need to graze?
Well, not as much as cows.
Right.
I would say that over a grazing season, depending on your land, of course, you would need somewhere around a quarter to half an acre over a whole season that you would be utilizing for one adult animal. But that can really vary because, you know, in Vermont, our land is so different. You know, an acre in Addison County is going to be very different than an acre in Washington County or Orange County. The thing that's nice about small ruminants like this is they can get on terrain that is not suitable for for cows and cattle or horses. And they can utilize, you know, grasses and forages that cows really wouldn't use, and they can make that into milk or meat.
Mm-hmm. And so the difference between sheep and goats, do they eat the same kinds of forage?
They're complementary. I mean, they obviously overlap, but if you were to turn sheep and goats into a paddock together, which I like putting them together, the goats tend to go more for the brushy stuff, the woody type things. They love that stuff. And then the sheep are more eating the grasses on the ground.
Okay. Well, a herd of goats moved into Montpelier this summer. They were there to help eat away at a problem that's been plaguing Vermont's capital city.
The goats are somewhat, focusing on poison ivy, but really we're doing just kind of a grazing, run through with the goats where they're going to eat everything, pretty much. The focus was the poison ivy, hopefully. We knew goats eat it, we knew they can, but there's so much poison ivy that there is a limit to a goat's poison ivy intake. And we've reached it, and we're attempting to see when it's finished and when they can go back to eating it. But they're awesome because they just stop eating it. If it's this bad and we don't spray, we don't do anything, it's going to be a situation where they gorge again and then don't touch it because there's just too much of it. So I think that going with these natural solutions and really doing test patches heck, we're behind a high school. We can come here, science, chemistry class that I probably flunked out of, come out here and, because this is the way you learn. This is, to me, the fun application of science. They're working goats. There's companies out west with hundreds of goats who seem to offer a franchise to people so that they can partially own the goats and take them out to different jobs. So maybe in a way, I don't know what this will all look like in 5 years, and especially not in 10 years. I have hopes. But I think it's also an opportunity for other people to get involved and for them to have a business that's good for the environment, that's good for the animals, and then it's good for humans to not manage animals, but to take care of them, foster them, raise them. They love people. They stop eating only when there's visitors, basically.
When this gets done and we take up the fences and you bring your goats back, what are you going to do with the goats?
Wash them. I'm just going to Tyvek suit myself out and wash them with apple cider vinegar, baking soda. We're going to have a whole day, the car, everything. That's the other thing I've learned is how to manage a toxic substance situation of the gloves, the clothing, I don't know, it was in their hooves. So if I approached them in their field at home in shorts, as I did, and had no plans of rubbing up on them per se, had gloves, they jump on you, cut your leg, you have poison ivy, you can't even wash it out. I'm learning, I think, tricks of the trade for the next year of doing this with more goats.
Our thanks to Mary Beth and her 3 goats, Ruth, Bader, and Ginsburg. If you're just joining us, I'm talking with Kimberly Hagan of UVM Extension's Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Now, Kimberly, you were instrumental in helping Mary Beth get this project off the ground. What were you hoping to accomplish?
Well, Montpelier had been in this situation where the recreation path there goes along the river, and there's about 50 feet between the path and the river, which is very steep. And for them, it's too difficult for a crew to go in there to try and weed whack, the poison ivy. And much of it is poison ivy. There's some lots of other, there's trees and shrubs too, honeysuckle, buckthorn, all these. And it's all invasive, a lot of invasive species that I get a lot of requests for. But the public had asked that they not spray it with herbicides because people use that path and they didn't want to be exposed to it. And a lot of folks were afraid of the river being right there. So they called me and said, help. So I said, well, I'm willing to help, make this grazing experiment happen and see if we can, see what it does. So I found this Mary Beth who was interested in trialing, and it was just an experiment to see how it would go. I think we were all excited about it, and I feel pretty happy about it. I think what we all realize is it's going to take more than just 3, of course.
Right, so work continues.
And work continues.
For more information about goats or grazing, you can contact Kimberly at UVM Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture. There you can also find resources for improving pasture with livestock and links to the Vermont Sheep and Goat Association. That's our program for today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.